The courtroom doors would open in exactly 2 weeks, and Eli Parker knew they might close on his entire life. A single father, a mechanic with grease under his fingernails and fear in his heart, fighting a legal battle he couldn't win. The system had already decided he was guilty of an accident he didn't cause, facing charges that could rip his 8-year-old daughter from his arms forever. That night, driving through a storm that felt like the end of everything, he saw her, a woman stranded on a deserted road, standing beside a car that cost more than he'd earn in 5 years. Every instinct screamed to keep driving. He was exhausted, broken, barely holding himself together. But something made him stop. Something made him help a complete stranger when he had nothing left to give. He had no idea that the woman he saved in the rain would soon hold his fate in her hands. He had no idea that one moment of kindness would change everything. This is the story of how helping someone cost him nothing and saved him everything. Before we continue this story, let us know in the comment section where you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The rain hammered against the windshield like 1,000 tiny fists. Eli gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his entire body aching from 14 hours at the mechanic shop. Oil stains darkened his work shirt, and the smell of engine grease clung to his skin no matter how many times he washed his hands. But physical exhaustion was nothing compared to the weight crushing his chest 2 weeks, until a judge decided if he'd ever see his daughter again. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. Jasmine Green, his lawyer. At 10:30 at night. Eli stared at it, watching it vibrate against the plastic, and let it go to voicemail. Whatever news she had could wait. Bad news always waited for you anyway, patient and inevitable. The accident replayed in his mind for the 1,000th time. 3 months ago, Highway 47, a regular Tuesday afternoon, the silver sedan swerving into his lane without warning, tires screaming, metal crunching, Gregory Lee climbing from his luxury car with barely a scratch, while Eli's Honda looked like it had been through a trash compactor. And somehow, Eli was the criminal. Eli was the one facing reckless driving charges that could send him to prison and destroy the only family he had left. "You were clearly speeding, Mr. Parker," Lee's lawyer had said at the preliminary hearing, his voice smooth and practiced. "Multiple witnesses confirm erratic behavior." Lies, all of it. But lies spoken by a man in a $2,000 suit carried more weight than truth from a mechanic who could barely afford his lawyer's consultation fee. The road curved ahead, and through the sheets of rain, Eli spotted hazard lights blinking weakly on the shoulder. A dark shape materialized, a sports car, hood down, someone inside. His foot hovered over the brake pedal. "Keep driving," his exhausted brain screamed. "You have enough problems. Whoever that is has insurance, has money, has people who can help them." But his hands were already turning the wheel. "Damn it," he muttered, pulling onto the shoulder 20 feet behind the disabled vehicle. The car was beautiful even in the storm-sleek lines. Expensive paint job, the kind of machine that came with concierge service and premium roadside assistance. So why was he stopping? Because Sarah would have stopped. His wife, gone 2 years now, buried beside her parents in Oakwood Cemetery, would have pulled over without hesitation. "We help people, Eli," she used to say, her hand warm in his. "That's what makes us human." Even when they were broke, even when they were struggling, Sarah never looked away from someone in need. Eli grabbed his worn jacket and stepped into the storm. Cold rain soaked through his shirt instantly, and he jogged toward the stranded car, his boots splashing through puddles. As he got closer, he could see a figure in the driver's seat, barely visible through the rain-streaked glass. He knocked hard on the window. It rolled down halfway, revealing a woman in her late 30s, professional, put together despite the circumstances. Dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, though a few strands had escaped. Designer jacket, the kind of composure that came from handling pressure for a living. "Car trouble?" Eli asked, raising his voice over the storm. The woman studied him for a long moment, clearly weighing whether to trust a stranger in a mechanic's uniform appearing out of the rain at night. "The engine died. I was driving home when it started making a grinding noise, then just stopped. Pop the hood. I really don't think." "Ma'am, you're sitting in a dead car in the middle of nowhere during a storm. This road sees maybe 2 vehicles an hour on a good night. Let me look." Something in his tone must have convinced her because she reached down and pulled the hood release. Eli moved to the front, lifting the hood and propping it open. Rain poured onto the engine block as he leaned in, using his phone's flashlight to scan the components. The serpentine belt, the alternator, the battery connections. His eyes moved with practiced efficiency. "Do you always stop for strangers?" the woman called from inside the car. "Only when they look like they need it," Eli called back, his fingers tracing the belt path. There. The alternator belt had slipped off its pulley, probably from normal wear, finally giving way. Simple problem. Easy fix if you knew what you were doing. "You have roadside assistance?" "Yes, but they'll be here in 2 hours minimum. This storm probably has them backed up with accidents all over the county." He straightened, wiping rain from his face. "I can fix this in 10 minutes if you'll let me." The woman hesitated, then opened her door and stepped into the rain. She immediately pulled her jacket tighter, but didn't retreat. "I'm Charlotte," she said, extending her hand. "Eli." His handshake was firm but quick, no point standing in the downpour. "Hold on. I need tools." He jogged back to his truck, grabbed his toolbox from behind the seat, the same battered red metal box his father had given him 20 years ago, and returned to Charlotte's car. She stood a few feet back, watching as he went to work. The belt had simply jumped off its track. He checked the pulley alignment, made sure there was no damage, then guided the belt back into place and adjusted the tension. "You do this for a living?" Charlotte asked. "I'm a mechanic. This is basically breathing for me." He tested the belt one more time, satisfied with the tension. "Try starting it now." Charlotte climbed back into the driver's seat, and Eli heard her take a breath before turning the key. The engine roared to life immediately, smooth and steady. Relief flooded her face, visible even in the dim interior light. She stepped back out, and this time her expression had softened completely. "Thank you, really. That could have been a disaster. Please, let me pay you for your time." "No need. You stopped in the middle of a storm." "Ma'am, I tightened a belt." "Took 5 minutes." Eli closed his toolbox, already backing toward his truck. "Just drive safe, okay? And get that belt properly checked soon, or you'll be stuck again." "Wait." Charlotte moved forward, stopping him. "At least let me get your contact information. I'd like to properly thank you when I'm not standing in a monsoon." But Eli was already shaking his head, offering a tired smile. "No thanks necessary. Just helping out." He raised a hand in farewell and headed to his truck. He didn't need recognition, didn't need payment. He just needed to get home to Sophia, to kiss her forehead while she slept, to pretend for a few hours that the world wasn't about to crumble. As he climbed into his truck, soaking wet and shivering, he glanced in the rearview mirror. Charlotte stood in the rain, watching him leave, something unreadable in her expression. For just a moment, their eyes met in the reflection, a stranger he'd never see again, a moment of connection that would disappear like water down a drain. Then Eli pulled back onto the road, and Charlotte vanished into the darkness behind him. 20 minutes later, he was home. The small rental house looked tired in the night, paint peeling on the shutters, grass needing to be cut. Inside, Mrs. Chen from next door was dozing on the couch, her knitting in her lap. She startled awake when the door opened. "Long night?" she asked, gathering her things. "Aren't they all?" Eli pulled $20 from his pocket money. He couldn't spare but had to pay. "Was Sophia okay?" "Perfect angel, as always. Did her homework without being asked. Ate all her dinner. Even brushed her teeth twice." "Mrs." Chen stood, but paused at the door, her weathered hand touching his arm. "Eli, that little girl loves you more than anything in this world. Whatever happens, don't forget that." The words hit harder than they should have. "I won't." After she left, Eli stood in the quiet house, water dripping from his clothes onto the worn floorboards. The lawyer's voicemail still waited on his phone. He should listen to it. Should face whatever bad news Jasmine had to deliver. But not tonight. Tonight he needed to see his daughter, to remember what he was fighting for. He crept into Sophia's room. She was sprawled across her twin bed, one arm hanging off the side, her stuffed rabbit clutched in the other hand. Brown curls spread across the pillow like a halo, and in sleep, she looked so peaceful, so blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around their lives. Eli knelt beside her bed, his knees protesting, and brushed a curl from her forehead. Her skin was warm, her breathing steady and deep. Safe. For now she was safe. "I'm going to fix this, baby girl," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I promise you. I won't let them take you away from me. I don't care what it takes." Sophia stirred, mumbling something unintelligible in her sleep. Eli stayed there, frozen in place, just watching her breathe, memorizing every detail of her face, the small scar on her chin from when she fell off her bike last summer, the way her nose crinkled even in sleep, the tiny hands that still reached for him when she was scared. Because in 2 weeks, a judge would decide if he deserved to keep being her father. In 2 weeks, his entire world would either survive or shatter into pieces too small to ever put back together. He finally stood, every muscle in his body screaming, and made his way to his own bedroom. The voicemail notification glowed on his phone. Tomorrow. He'd deal with it tomorrow. Tonight, he just needed to close his eyes and dream of a world where doing the right thing actually mattered, where justice wasn't just for people who could afford it, where a single father, working himself to death to provide for his daughter, didn't have to be afraid of the system that was supposed to protect them. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean while Eli's life remained stained with fear and uncertainty. But somewhere across town, in a house that didn't leak when it rained, in a life that didn't teeter on the edge of collapse, a woman named Charlotte sat with a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. She was thinking about a mechanic who'd stopped in a storm to help a complete stranger, thinking about character, about the kind of person who gave without asking for anything in return, who fixed what was broken and disappeared into the night. She didn't know his last name, didn't know where he lived or what battles he was fighting, or that in exactly 14 days their paths would cross again in a way neither of them could have imagined. Not yet. The courthouse loomed like a monument to everything Eli couldn't control. Gray, stone, tall, columns, marble steps worn smooth by decades of people walking toward their fates. Eli stood at the bottom of those steps, his borrowed suit hanging awkwardly on his frame, the tie choking him like a noose. Jasmine Green stood beside him, her briefcase clutched tight, her expression carefully neutral. "Remember what we talked about," she said quietly. "Answer the questions directly. Don't elaborate unless asked. Don't let the prosecutor get under your skin." "I know." Eli's voice came out hoarse. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours last night, lying awake in the darkness, listening to Sophia breathe in the next room, wondering if it was one of the last nights he'd ever hear that sound. "And Eli?" Jasmine turned to face him fully. "Whatever happens in there, you tell the truth. Just the truth. That's all we have, but it's enough. It has to be enough." It didn't feel like enough. Not against Gregory Lee's legal team, not against the police report that painted Eli as reckless and Lee as the victim, not against a system that seemed designed to crush people who couldn't afford to fight back. They climbed the steps together. Each one felt heavier than the last. Inside, the courthouse was all polished wood and hushed voices. People in suits moved past them with purpose, lawyers and defendants and families, everyone carrying their own crisis, their own desperation. Eli's hands were shaking. He shoved them in his pockets, trying to appear calm, trying to be the kind of man a judge would trust with a child's future. The courtroom was smaller than he'd imagined. Rows of wooden benches, a raised platform for the judge, the prosecution's table already occupied. Gregory Lee sat there, looking comfortable and confident, his lawyer leaning close to whisper something that made Lee nod. When Lee glanced over at Eli, there was something cold in his eyes. Not anger, not even malice, just indifference. Like Eli was an inconvenience, a minor obstacle to be swept aside. Eli took his seat at the defense table. The wood was cool under his palms. His heart hammered against his ribs so hard he thought everyone in the room must be able to hear it. "All rise." The bailiff's voice cut through the quiet murmur of the courtroom. Everyone stood. The door behind the judge's bench opened, and Eli's world tilted on its axis. She walked in with authority, black robes flowing, her posture commanding immediate respect. Dark hair pulled back in that same neat bun. The same composed features. The same woman who'd stood in the rain 2 weeks ago beside a broken-down sports car. Charlotte. No, not Charlotte. Judge Evelyn Brooks, according to the nameplate on the bench. Eli's breath caught in his throat. His vision tunneled. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be happening. The woman he'd helped, the stranger he'd stopped for in the storm, was the judge presiding over his case, the person who would decide if he kept his daughter or lost everything. "Please be seated," Judge Brooks said, her voice calm and professional. She opened a folder on her bench, her eyes scanning the contents, and for one heart-stopping moment, Eli thought she looked directly at him. But her expression didn't change. No recognition, no acknowledgement. She simply looked back down at her papers. Had she recognized him? Did she remember? Or was he just another face in another case, another person whose life she would weigh and measure and judge? "We're here for the preliminary hearing in the case of the state versus Eli Parker," Judge Brooks continued. "Charges of reckless driving causing injury. Is the prosecution ready?" "Yes, Your Honor." The prosecutor stood, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and sharper suit. "The state is prepared to present evidence that the defendant engaged in dangerous driving behavior that directly resulted in serious injury to Mr. Gregory Lee." "Defense?" Jasmine stood, and Eli could hear the slight tremor in her voice. "Ready, Your Honor." The hearing began. The prosecutor laid out the case methodically. The accident on Highway 47, the witness statements claiming Eli had been speeding, weaving between lanes, the medical reports detailing Lee's injuries, a broken collarbone, severe whiplash, ongoing physical therapy, the photos of Lee's car, damaged but not destroyed, then photos of Eli's Honda, completely totaled, twisted metal and shattered glass. The defendant's vehicle sustained catastrophic damage, the prosecutor said, holding up one of the photos, consistent with high-speed impact and reckless operation. Meanwhile, Mr. Lee's vehicle, while damaged, shows impact patterns consistent with being struck by an out-of-control vehicle. Eli wanted to scream, wanted to stand up and shout that it was all backwards, all lies. Lee had swerved into his lane. Lee had caused the accident, but Jasmine's hand pressed against his arm, holding him in place, and he forced himself to stay silent. Judge Brooks listened to it all, her expression neutral, occasionally making notes. When the prosecutor finished, she turned to Jasmine. "Does the defense wish to present any preliminary arguments?" Jasmine stood again. "Your Honor, the defense maintains that Mr. Parker was not at fault in this accident. The physical evidence and witness statements have been misrepresented. We have witnesses who will testify that Mr. Lee swerved into Mr. Parker's lane without warning, causing the collision. Yet the police report indicates otherwise," the prosecutor interjected. "Multiple witnesses, Counselor," Judge Brooks said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "You'll have your chance to present your full case at trial. This is a preliminary hearing to determine if there's sufficient evidence to proceed." The prosecutor sat down, but there was satisfaction in her expression. She knew they had enough evidence. They both knew it. Judge Brooks studied the documents in front of her for a long moment. The silence stretched, agonizing, and Eli felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the courthouse's cool air. Finally, she looked up. "The court finds sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. Trial date is set for," she consulted her calendar, 6 weeks from today. "Defendant will remain free on current bail conditions." 6 weeks. 6 more weeks of this torture, this waiting, this fear. However, Judge Brooks continued, and something in her tone made everyone in the courtroom lean forward slightly. "I'm ordering both parties to submit complete accident reconstruction reports. I want independent analysis of the physical evidence, the vehicle damage patterns, and the road conditions at the time of the accident." The prosecutor frowned. "Your Honor, we already have the police report. I'm aware of what we have, Counselor. I'm ordering additional analysis. If there's any question about the sequence of events, I want it thoroughly examined before we proceed to trial." Judge Brooks's gaze swept the packed courtroom, and for just a fraction of a second, her eyes met Eli's. Justice requires certainty, not assumptions. Eli's heart was racing. Was this normal? Did judges typically order additional investigations, or was this something else? Was she helping him, or was he reading meaning into nothing, desperately searching for hope where none existed? The hearing concluded. Everyone stood as Judge Brooks left the courtroom, her robes disappearing through the door behind the bench. Eli felt Jasmine's hand on his shoulder. "That was unexpected," she said quietly. "Ordering reconstruction reports at the preliminary hearing stage? That's unusual, very unusual. What does it mean?" "It means the judge wants a complete picture before making any decisions. It means she's not taking anything at face value." Jasmine packed her briefcase, and when she looked at Eli, there was cautious hope in her eyes. "It means we might actually have a chance." Eli nodded, but he couldn't speak, couldn't process what had just happened. He walked out of the courtroom in a daze, barely aware of Jasmine talking to him about next steps, about the reconstruction experts she'd need to hire, about depositions and discovery. In the courthouse hallway, he found a bench and sat down, his legs suddenly unable to hold him. People flowed past lawyers, defendants, families. The hallway smelled like floor polish and old coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. And Eli sat there, his mind spinning, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She'd recognized him. He was sure of it now. That moment when their eyes met, there had been something there. Recognition, maybe even concern. But she was the judge. She couldn't show favoritism, couldn't reveal that they'd met before. So instead, she'd ordered additional investigation, had demanded more evidence, had essentially given his case a lifeline without ever acknowledging why. Or maybe he was imagining all of it. Maybe she was just being thorough. Maybe this was how she handled every case. And Eli was projecting hope onto professional neutrality because he was desperate for any sign that the universe wasn't completely against him. His phone buzzed. Mrs. Chen. Sophia's school had called his daughter, had gotten into a fight with another student. Something about that student saying Sophia's dad was going to jail. Eli closed his eyes, pressing the phone against his forehead. Even at school, even in second grade, the case was poisoning Sophia's life. "I'm coming," he texted back. "Be there in 20 minutes. He stood, his legs steadier now, and walked toward the courthouse exit. The sun was bright outside, almost offensive in its cheerfulness. The world kept turning, indifferent to the fact that Eli's life was suspended in limbo, hanging by threads that could snap at any moment. But as he walked to his truck, Eli thought about Judge Brooks's words. Justice requires certainty, not assumptions. Maybe, just maybe, someone in the system was actually looking for the truth instead of just processing another case. Maybe that rainy night 2 weeks ago had mattered more than he'd thought. Or maybe he was a fool for hoping. Either way, he had 6 weeks to find out. That evening, after picking up Sophia from school and listening to her tearful explanation of why she'd pushed Tommy Henderson, because Tommy said mean things about Daddy and Sophia wasn't going to let anyone say mean things about Daddy. Eli sat on their worn couch, his daughter curled against his side, watching a cartoon she was probably too old for but still loved. "Daddy?" Sophia's voice was small. "Are you going away?" "No, baby. I'm not going anywhere." "Tommy said you're going to jail," he said his mom told him. Eli's jaw clenched. He forced himself to relax to keep his voice calm. "Tommy doesn't know what he's talking about. I didn't do anything wrong, and the judge is going to figure that out." "Promise?" How could he promise? How could he guarantee anything when nothing in his life was certain anymore? But he looked down at his daughter's face, saw the trust in her eyes, the absolute faith that Daddy could fix anything, and he wouldn't let fear steal that from her. "I promise," he whispered, pulling her closer. "Everything's going to be okay." Sophia settled against him, satisfied, her attention back on the cartoon. But Eli stared at the television without seeing it, his mind elsewhere, in a courtroom, in a judge's chambers, in the split second when Judge Brooks's eyes had met his and something unspoken had passed between them. He'd helped a stranger in the rain. Nothing more, nothing less. An act of basic human decency that should have been insignificant, forgettable, meaningless in the grand scheme of his life. But as Sophia's breathing slowed and deepened as she fell asleep against his shoulder, Eli wondered if maybe, just maybe, that one moment had changed everything. If kindness, real and genuine and given freely, had the power to reach across the gulf between a desperate father and an impartial judge. If maybe, for once in his life, Doing the right thing would actually matter. Across town, in her home office, Judge Evelyn Brooks sat at her desk long after she should have gone to bed. The Parker case file lay open in front of her, and she'd read through it 3 times now, examining every detail, every piece of evidence, every witness statement. She knew this was dangerous, knew that her personal feelings, if they could even be called that after such a brief encounter, had no place in her courtroom. She was a judge. Impartiality was her oath, her duty, her entire purpose. But she also knew injustice when she saw it. And the more she read through the Parker file, the more things didn't add up. Witness statements that contradicted the physical evidence. A police report that seemed rushed, incomplete. A defendant with no prior record, no history of reckless behavior, facing charges that could destroy his life. And she kept seeing him in the rain, exhausted, soaking wet, stopping to help a stranger when he clearly had nothing to spare. Not asking for payment, not asking for thanks. Just fixing what was broken and disappearing into the night. That was character, real character. The kind you couldn't fake, couldn't manufacture for a jury. But none of that mattered in a courtroom. Only evidence mattered, only facts, only what could be proven and documented and presented according to the law. So, she'd ordered the reconstruction reports, given his defense a chance to present a complete picture, done what she could within the boundaries of her position to ensure that justice, real justice, would be served. And if Eli Parker was innocent, as every instinct told her he was, then the evidence would prove it. It had to. Because Judge Evelyn Brooks had spent 20 years on the bench, and she'd learned to trust her judgment about people. And the man she'd met in the rain, the man who'd helped her without hesitation or expectation, was not the kind of man who would recklessly endanger others. She closed the file and turned off her desk lamp. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new decisions, new lives hanging in the balance. But tonight, she allowed herself one small hope that maybe this time the system would work the way it was supposed to, that maybe this time the good guy wouldn't lose everything. The next 6 weeks crawled by like months. Eli worked, came home, helped Sophia with homework, and tried not to let her see the fear that never left his chest. The reconstruction reports came back 3 weeks before trial, and when Jasmine called him with the results, her voice was shaking. Eli, the independent analysis backs up everything we've been saying. The angle of impact, the damage patterns, the skid marks, everything points to Lee swerving into your lane. The other driver caused the accident. For the first time in months, Eli felt like he could breathe. So we can win this? There was a pause on the other end of the line. We have a much better chance now. But Eli, Lee's team isn't going to just roll over. They'll challenge the findings, bring in their own experts, try to discredit the analysis. This fight isn't over yet. The trial began on a Tuesday morning that felt like every other Tuesday in Eli's life, except it was the day that would decide everything. He wore the same borrowed suit, tied the same choking tie, and walked up those same courthouse steps. But this time, Sophia wasn't at school. Mrs. Chen had her at home, waiting, because Eli couldn't bear the thought of his daughter sitting in a courtroom watching her father's life be dissected. Judge Brooks entered the courtroom, and Eli's heart did that same lurch it had done at the preliminary hearing. She looked exactly as she had before, composed, professional, unreadable. As the trial began, she maintained that same neutral expression, listening to both sides with equal attention. The prosecutor presented her case first. Witnesses who claimed they'd seen Eli speeding, photos of the wreckage, medical reports of Lee's injuries. But when Jasmine stood for cross-examination, she was relentless. Mr. Henderson, you testified that you saw the defendant's vehicle weaving between lanes before the accident. Is that correct? Yes, that's what I saw. And where were you positioned when you witnessed this? I was behind both vehicles. Behind both vehicles, so you were looking at the rear of both cars, correct? Well, yes, but from behind 2 vehicles, could you clearly see which car initiated the lane change that led to the collision? The witness hesitated. I saw the Parker vehicle moving erratically. That's not what I asked. Could you clearly determine, from your position behind both vehicles, which driver initiated the lane change? I suppose not with complete certainty. One by one, Jasmine dismantled the prosecution's witnesses. Their testimony crumbled under scrutiny, revealed as assumptions and interpretations rather than concrete facts. And then came the reconstruction expert, Dr. Sarah Martinez took the stand with the calm authority of someone who testified in hundreds of cases. She explained the physics of the collision, the mathematics of impact angles, the science of vehicle dynamics. Her conclusion was clear and unambiguous. Gregory Lee had swerved into Eli's lane, causing the accident. The damage patterns on both vehicles, the tire marks on the roadway, the final resting positions, everything tells the same story, Dr. Martinez said, pointing to enlarged photos on a display board. Mr. Lee's vehicle initiated the lane change. Mr. Parker attempted to avoid the collision, but was unable to do so. The prosecutor tried to challenge her findings, brought in a competing expert who suggested alternative interpretations. But under questioning from Jasmine, the prosecution's expert admitted he'd been hired by Lee's insurance company, admitted his analysis had been rushed, admitted there were possible alternative scenarios. Throughout it all, Judge Brooks watched and listened. She asked pointed questions when testimony seemed unclear. She demanded clarification when experts used technical jargon. She was thorough, exacting, and completely professional. If she recognized Eli, if she remembered that rainy night, nothing in her demeanor suggested it. On the third day of trial, Gregory Lee himself took the stand. He was polished, confident, articulate. He described the accident from his perspective, driving home from a business meeting, obeying all traffic laws, when suddenly Eli's vehicle slammed into him. "I had no time to react," Lee said, his voice carrying just the right amount of emotion. "One moment I was driving normally, the next moment I was being hit. The impact was devastating." But when Jasmine stood to cross-examine, her expression was sharp. "Mr. Lee, you stated you were driving home from a business meeting. What time did that meeting end?" "Around 4:30 in the afternoon. And the accident occurred at 5:15, is that correct?" "Yes." "Your office is approximately 20 minutes from the accident site, correct?" "I suppose so, yes. So you left your office at 4:30 and didn't reach a location 20 minutes away until 5:15. That's 45 minutes for a 20-minute drive. Where were you during those extra 25 minutes? Lee's composure slipped slightly. I may have stopped for coffee." "May have? You don't remember?" "I stopped for coffee. At a drive-through." "Which one?" "I don't recall exactly." "You don't recall which coffee shop you stopped at less than an hour before a serious accident that you claim traumatized you?" "It was months ago." "I don't remember every detail." Jasmine pulled out a document. "Mr. Lee, these are your credit card statements from that day. There's no charge for coffee anywhere along your route home. I paid cash." "Every? You? A man who, according to these statements, uses his credit card for purchases as small as $3, suddenly paid cash for coffee that day?" The prosecutor objected, and Judge Brooks sustained it, but the damage was done. Lee's credibility was cracking. Then Jasmine delivered the final blow. "Mr. Lee, is it true that you were texting while driving immediately before the accident?" "No, that's not. Your phone records show 3 text messages sent from your device between 5 to 10 and 5:14 p.m. The accident occurred at 5:15. You were texting and driving, weren't you?" I may have glanced at my phone, but you were texting and driving." Lost focus, swerved into Mr. Parker's lane, and caused this accident. "And then you lied about it to protect yourself and avoid liability." "That's not true." But his voice was too loud, too defensive. The jury saw it, the courtroom saw it, and Judge Brooks, sitting on her bench with that same neutral expression, saw it too. The trial concluded the next day with closing arguments. The prosecutor did her best to salvage the case, arguing that reasonable doubt remained about who truly caused the accident. But Jasmine painted a clear picture: a distracted driver texting behind the wheel, a working father trying to get home to his daughter, an accident caused by negligence and covered up by lies. Judge Brooks gave the jury their instructions, and they filed out to deliberate. Eli sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, his head in his hands, while Jasmine paced nearby. Hours passed. 2 hours. 3 hours. 4. "Is this good or bad?" Eli asked. "That they're taking so long? It's impossible to know. Juries are unpredictable." Finally, after 5 hours, the bailiff emerged. They've reached a verdict. Eli's legs barely carried him back into the courtroom. His hands were shaking so badly he had to sit on them. Sophia's face filled his mind, her smile, her laugh, the way she called him Daddy in that voice that made everything else disappear. The jury filed in. 12 faces, 12 strangers who held his entire life in their hands. The forewoman stood when Judge Brooks asked if they'd reached a verdict. "We have, Your Honor. What say you?" In the case of the state versus Eli Parker, on the charge of reckless driving causing injury, we find the defendant not guilty. The words hit Eli like a physical force. Not guilty. Not guilty. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process anything except those 2 words echoing in his head. Jasmine was hugging him, crying, saying something he couldn't hear over the roaring in his ears. Judge Brooks was speaking, thanking the jury, officially dismissing the case, but Eli barely heard any of it. He was free. Sophia was safe. His life wasn't ending. Everything he'd been holding together through sheer force of will suddenly released, and he had to grip the table to keep from collapsing. The courtroom emptied slowly. Lee and his legal team left quickly, avoiding eye contact. The prosecutor packed her briefcase with tight, angry movements, and Eli just sat there, trying to remember how to breathe normally. "Mr. Parker," he looked up. Judge Brooks stood a few feet away, having stepped down from her bench. This close, Eli could see fine lines around her eyes, could see the human being behind the black robes. "Your Honor, his voice broke. "Thank you. Justice was served," she said simply. "That's all that matters." But there was something in her eyes, something warm and knowing, and Eli understood. She had recognized him, had remembered, and while she couldn't say it, couldn't acknowledge it in any official capacity, she had fought for him in the only way she could, by demanding the truth, by refusing to accept incomplete evidence, by ensuring that his case received the thoroughness it deserved. "That night," Eli said quietly, "in the rain, I didn't. No, neither did I." Judge Brooks glanced around the empty courtroom, then back at him. "But character reveals itself in unexpected moments, Mr. Parker. You revealed yours when you stopped to help a stranger. That matters. It was just a loose belt. It was kindness without expectation of return. That's rare." She adjusted her robes, preparing to leave. "Go home to your daughter, hug her tight. That's what matters now." She turned to go, but Eli called after her. "Judge Brooks, if you ever need your car fixed again, I know a decent mechanic." For the first time, she smiled, really smiled. "I'll keep that in mind." Then, she was gone, disappearing through the door behind the bench, and Eli was left standing in the empty courtroom, his heart lighter than it had been in months. He called Mrs. Chen from the courthouse steps, his hands still shaking as he dialed. "I'm coming home," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Tell Sophia I'm coming home and I'm never leaving." The drive back felt different. The same streets, the same potholes, the same worn-out neighborhoods, but everything looked brighter, felt lighter. Eli turned on the radio for the first time in months, let music fill the truck instead of silence and fear. When he pulled up to the house, Sophia was already on the front porch, Mrs. Chen holding her back. But the moment Eli stepped out of the truck, she broke free and ran to him, her small body crashing into his legs with enough force to nearly knock him over. "Daddy! Daddy! You're home!" "I'm home, baby girl." Eli scooped her up, held her tight, buried his face in her hair. "I'm home and I'm never going anywhere." "You promise?" "I promise." That night, after Sophia was asleep, after the adrenaline had faded and the reality had settled in, Eli sat on his porch with a beer he couldn't really afford but desperately needed. The neighborhood was quiet, just the sound of crickets and distant traffic. His phone buzzed with congratulations texts from friends, from co-workers, from people who'd supported him through the nightmare. Then, a number he didn't recognize appeared on his screen. A text message. "I meant what I said about that, thank you. If you're interested, there's a cafe on Main Street that makes excellent coffee. Tomorrow, 2 p.m.? Eli stared at the message for a long moment. Judge Evelyn Brooks, Charlotte, the woman he'd helped in the rain, who'd helped him in return in ways he was only beginning to understand. This was dangerous territory. She'd been his judge, had presided over his case. But the case was over now. He was a free man. And maybe, just maybe, one act of kindness could lead to something more than just justice. He typed back, "I'll be there." The next afternoon, Eli arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early, wearing his best jeans and a clean shirt. His heart was racing like he was a teenager on a first date, which was ridiculous. This wasn't a date. This was just coffee with someone who'd been instrumental in saving his life. Nothing more. Judge Brooks, no, Evelyn. He should probably call her Evelyn now, arrived exactly on time. She'd traded her judicial robes for civilian clothes, and somehow she looked both more approachable and more intimidating. They ordered coffee, found a quiet corner table, and for a moment, neither of them knew how to begin. "So," Evelyn said finally, "this is awkward." Eli laughed, surprised. Yeah, it really is. I want to be clear about something." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, her expression serious. "I didn't reach out to you because of any feelings or romantic interest. I reached out because I owe you an explanation, and because I believe you deserve to know the truth about what happened during your trial." "Okay." Eli felt oddly disappointed but nodded. "I'm listening. When you stopped to help me that night, I had no idea who you were. And when I walked into that courtroom and saw you sitting at the defense table, I was shocked. I considered recusing myself from the case, but that would have raised questions and would have delayed your trial even further. So you recognized me immediately, the moment I looked at you." Evelyn took a sip of her coffee. "And I want you to understand I didn't do anything improper. I didn't favor you, didn't manipulate evidence, didn't violate my oath. What I did was ensure that your case received the thoroughness it deserved, that all evidence was properly examined, that justice was genuinely served." "The reconstruction reports," Eli said. "You ordered those because of me, because you believed I was innocent. I ordered them because the initial investigation was incomplete, because the evidence didn't match the charges, because good judgment requires looking beyond surface assumptions." She met his eyes. "Would I have been as diligent if we hadn't met that night? I honestly don't know. Maybe. I like to think I would have. But meeting you, seeing your character in that moment when you had nothing to gain, it reminded me why I became a judge in the first place, to find the truth, to protect the innocent, to ensure that justice isn't just for people who can afford it." They talked for 2 hours, about the trial, about the accident, about what Eli's life had been like living under that cloud of fear. Evelyn told him about her own journey to the bench, about cases that had kept her awake at night, about the impossible balance between law and humanity. "I don't do this," Evelyn said eventually. "I don't meet with defendants after cases conclude. I maintain strict boundaries between my professional and personal life. But you helped me when you had every reason not to. When you were exhausted and struggling and facing your own crisis, you stopped anyway. That kind of character is rare, Eli. And I think," she hesitated, then continued, "I think maybe sometimes we're allowed to bend our own rules, just a little." Eli smiled. "So this is you, bending the rules? This is me having coffee with someone who showed me unexpected kindness. What happens after that? I don't know. But I wanted you to know that what you did mattered. That small acts of decency ripple out in ways we can't predict." They finished their coffee and walked out together into the afternoon sun. Main Street was busy with people going about their lives, unaware that two people who'd met by chance in a rainstorm had just changed each other's trajectories. "Thank you," Eli said, "for everything. For the justice, for the coffee, for the explanation." "Thank you for stopping that night," Evelyn replied, "for being the kind of person who helps strangers in the rain." They stood there for a moment, and then Evelyn did something unexpected. She pulled a business card from her purse and handed it to him. Her personal cell number was written on the back. "If you ever need anything," she said, "or if you just want to talk. I meant what I said about your character. Eli, the world needs more people like you." Then she walked to her car, and Eli watched her drive away, the business card warm in his hand. 6 months later, Eli stood in his garage, his own garage, attached to the small auto repair shop he'd finally been able to open with a loan and a lot of hard work. The sign out front read, "Parker's Honest Mechanics," and already he had more work than he could handle. Word had spread about the single dad mechanic who'd been falsely accused and fought back, and people trusted him. Sophia was at school, thriving now that the shadow of the trial had lifted. She'd made new friends, joined the soccer team, started smiling again in a way that made Eli's heart ache with gratitude every time he saw it. And Evelyn? They'd met for coffee 6 more times since that first afternoon, slowly, carefully, building something that neither of them wanted to rush or define. She came to Sophia's soccer games sometimes, sitting in the bleachers beside Eli, cheering for a little girl who'd started calling her Miss Evelyn. They had dinner occasionally, talked about their lives, their hopes, their fears. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't perfect. But it was real, and it was built on a foundation of character and kindness, and 2 people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances. Eli's phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn. "Sophia's game is at 3, right? I'll be there. Bringing popcorn." He smiled, typed back, "She'll love that. See you there." As he returned to the car he was working on, Eli thought about that rainy night 6 months ago, about stopping for a stranger, about one small choice that had somehow led to everything: his freedom, his business, his daughter's happiness, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something more. Sometimes life's greatest transformations came from the smallest acts of kindness. Sometimes helping someone cost you nothing and saved you everything. And sometimes the people you helped in your darkest moments turned out to be exactly the people who could help you find the light. Eli Parker had learned that lesson in a courtroom, in a rainstorm, in the eyes of a judge who believed in justice and a mechanic who believed in doing the right thing. And he would carry that lesson for the rest of his life. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness matters and that sometimes the smallest gestures can change everything, make sure to subscribe to Humanity Stories. Hit that like button and drop a comment below telling us about a time when a small act of kindness made a big difference in your life. We read every single comment, and your stories inspire us to keep bringing you more narratives that celebrate the power of human compassion and the unexpected ways our lives can intersect. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that good people still exist. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.